We've been talking about learning how to be a disciple-making disciple of Jesus, and it's a very short introduction that we're doing. It's a very brief introduction to central reality that, if embraced, will alter your life. And I confess to you that it will alter your life in a way that is exhilarating and joyful. It'll fill your heart with joy to begin this journey and to find yourself more and more on this journey. But now we come to the seventh of our little talks, and I'd like to bring us back to the last of the 12 scriptures that I suggested that you might want to memorize. Well, not might want to memorize, suggested that you should memorize 12 things that Jesus has said about being a disciple that will really help you on this journey. And the 12th one comes from the last chapter of the Gospel of John, and it's chapter 21 and verse 19. It's a story of Peter's restoration, and many of you may be familiar with this, that the Apostle Peter was the third of the disciples to begin to follow Jesus. And he very quickly emerges as a natural leader. He's impetuous, he's bold, he's strong. Men like him. He gets the nickname Rocky for a reason. And he imagines that he's going to do a great job. When he starts on the journey with Jesus, in his mind, he's going to be the best disciple there ever was, and he's going to be the right hand of the Lord in every way. But if you know the scriptures at all, you know that he comes to a moment in time when Jesus is arrested and taken into custody by the Roman authorities and will be put to death on a cross. Peter ducks and runs. Peter, who thought he would be so brave, fails miserably. And the story from John chapter 21 is the story of Peter's restoration, of how after the Lord was crucified and was raised from the dead on the third day, he appeared to Peter, and he appeared to other apostles and disciples, and eventually to over 500 of the first community of the faithful. And Peter is being restored. The Spirit of God is moving and working in him. And this is a story about that moment. We can only imagine that Peter is carrying in his heart a great deal of sadness. If you've made a grave error, even if you've been forgiven, you carry the memory of that error in your heart. And Peter is carrying this. But Jesus restores him. Jesus is encouraging him, blessing him, putting his arm around him, metaphorically, I suspect, if we had been there physically. But it's interesting that Peter is preoccupied about another man. Peter is asking Jesus, well, what about John? And in that question that he asks the Lord, he's showing us how human he is. Because don't we all measure ourselves by what we see in others? And it's very interesting that Jesus says to Peter, Peter, what John is nothing to you. What matters is what I'm calling you to be. So I want you to hear me, that the clear testimony of Jesus is that you have to be the kind of person God has made you to be. But being a disciple-making disciple applies to all the followers of Jesus. And it's wonderful to behold that as Peter comes to the end of his journey with the Lord on this earth, the Lord speaks into his life the very same words that he spoke into his life at the beginning of the journey. When Peter first met the Lord Jesus and began to come along, Jesus said to Peter, Peter, follow me. And now, after all this season, probably somewhere between 2 and 3 years of preparing to walk in the truth of Jesus, the last thing that Jesus says to Peter is, Peter, you follow me. So I want to leave you with that. The journey of being a disciple-making disciple is learning to follow Jesus. It's learning to be guided by Jesus. It's learning to be corrected by Jesus. It's learning to be praised and affirmed by Jesus. The heart of being a disciple-making disciple is being a Jesus man or a Jesus woman in the best sense of the word. People did not turn away from Jesus because he was religious. People did not turn away from Jesus because he was a spiritual person. People drew near him because he was so authentic. He was so real. He was so what men and women wanted other human beings to be like. And they found themselves saying, I want to be like this man. To be a disciple-making disciple of Jesus is to learn to be that kind of woman or that kind of a man in your uniqueness, following Jesus and ready to help others follow Jesus. Won't you join us? Join the movement to be not just a believer, not just a church person, but a disciple of Jesus learning to be a disciple-making disciple.